Hey people, Shandy here. Have you ever experienced an intimate connection with someone who truly cared for you, only to discover it wasn't real? That despite everything you shared with them, and all those long nights keeping each other warm, everything they had ever told you was a lie. A manufactured script, written by a schizophrenic government agent who earns too little and works too much? No? Well then you are in luck, because Creature Commandos is the next best thing. Creature Commandos is the first entry in the new DC cinematic universe, which has been rebooted from the ground up by our Lord and Savior, James Francis Gunn Jr. Because, much like the big G in the sky, just one of him wasn't enough. After the substantial failure that was the original DCU, Francis thought it would be a very good idea to start fresh. Take aspects of the original he liked, such as the characters and some of the actors, and spit them into a new universe to play around with. Much like how Fortnite takes characters you love and forces them to do the gritty before being buck-broken by a heavily medicated 13-year-old. That's just one problem with this. See, when it comes to most reboots of an IP, the reboot is complete. Every aspect of what made the original unique has been changed in some fashion or another. Actors are swapped, plot points and stories are readapted to fit the modern audience, and CGI typically looks worse, but not this time. Since Spider-Man No Way I'm Watching This Again did so well, Francis thought it was a good idea to keep some of the plot points and characters from the original, despite them not being canonically connected. This, as some of you may have guessed, is rather confusing. Unlike 99.27% of the population, I have actually seen Peacemaker, which means I know that at some point or another, John Cena canonically makes contact with the Justice League of the original DCU and tells Jason to make love to a fish before the most wanted man in Hawaii laughs at him for being asexual. This is concerning because it seems that this version of the fish lover does not exist in this new universe, despite John Peacemaker being a canon character played by the same actor and remembering all of the events from the original show, as well as the film he appeared in, that film being the groundwork for the story we will be discussing today. Creature Commandos is a direct sequel to the events of The Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, featuring many returning characters such as Amanda Waller, John Economos, and the Weasel, my beloved. There are also direct references to events such as Project Starfish and Amanda being outed by her daughter for being a furry. We are also introduced to Rick Flag Sr. because, much like a 20-piece McNugget combo, just one isn't enough to satiate my needs. But we will discuss Rick in more detail at a later point. For now, all you need to understand is that Francis is the kind of guy to have his cake and eat it too. He felt too connected to the characters and setting he had been building up before this point, just to reboot them and let them go, despite fan favorites being given the boot and replaced with fresh meat for menopausal women to swoon over. We like to make jokes in this house, and sometimes the jokes just write themselves. This review will be focusing on four main aspects of the show: the setting, the plot, characters, and my themes. Timestamps for each section should be available, unless I forget. If that's the case, then don't worry. I have faith in your abilities. This means the review won't be in chronological order necessarily, as I will be jumping between different episodes to help elaborate my points. Also, big spoilers ahead.
Starfish is a slang term for a butthole. Think there's any connection?
In order to explain this setting, we need to catch you up to speed. We know nothing. You are now up to speed. As mentioned previously, Creature Commandos takes place some time after the events of The Suicide Squad and Peacemaker. Except it doesn't. Because since this is a reboot of the universe, it would mean certain details aren't going to be the same. For example, the Justice League are no longer real, which means they can't hurt me anymore. Superman isn't exactly a well-established character at this point in time, which means Bloodsport couldn't have been arrested for shooting him with a kryptonite bullet. However, if Barry Allen, the dumbest man alive, is capable of making Joel Schumacher canon, then anything is possible, and a new justification for Bloodsport's arrest can be made up on the spot. The issue is just why? Why go through all the effort of making a brand new universe and setting if we are just going to cannibalize what's already been established? How many details, small or large, are going to need to be changed in order to make this new universe function? Is it only a matter of switching actors out for ones Francis wants to work with, or is it something more? Well, it has to be. Entire stories from the original universe can no longer function in this new setting because it would break the plot in half before we got to the title card. Wonder Woman would need to not exist, or at least be displaced in some manner or another, in order for Circe to kinda exist, since Themyscira is not only actively recognized in this world as a real place, but it has existed long enough for dedicated scholars of a supposedly fake island to be held in high esteem by the shadiest government official in existence. Even though Wonder Woman is supposed to be the world's first introduction to Themyscira, she isn't exactly around to help, kinda like Superman. At least I hope Superman isn't well established, since if he is, then he just left an allied nation of the United States of America, which only recently came out of isolation to join the rest of the world, to fend for themselves against an invading force of Ben Shapiro fans led by Yennefer from the Netflix Witcher show. But don't worry guys, I'm sure this is all going to be explained in the upcoming film. Speaking of Reddit atheists, I just described the inciting incident of the show. The reason for assembling the Commandos in the first place is so they can go and protect the Queen of Pakolistan against an Amazonian sorceress and her militia. Because, much like picking cotton in a warm field, sometimes you need the right people for the job. I'm getting ahead of myself. Who, or what even are the Creature Commandos? The Retainer Raiders are a team of superpowered prisoners composed entirely of monsters. Because Amanda was caught attending the Texas Furry Fiesta of 2022, she was restricted by Congress from using human task force members out of fear she would continue to increase the attendance numbers. Left with no other choice, she is forced to rely on the Minion Marines and tasks Rick Flag Sr. with leading the group. In order to keep the picket puppets in line, they are injected with a microchip which sends an incredibly powerful jolt of electricity directly into their brains if even one of them steps out of line. I guess one of the benefits of being rebooted is Amanda figured out blowing up your resources for simply doing the thing their description stated they would do wasn't a good enough reason for sending them to their ancestors early. With that electrifying introduction out of the way, we can begin the shit show. You are now up to speed.
Tell them about the dance-off to save the universe.
What dance-off?
The plot. It's an integral element in the assessment of any story's quality that a lot of people just don't like talking about. Unfortunately for those people, Francis still manages to make stories where the plot is important. And despite my best interests, I can't help but notice just how bad they've gotten. We've established how Amanda needs the help of the Commandos to secure Illana Rostovic, the Queen of Pakolistan, against this invading force of male Chudge and their femdom fairy. Except we haven't. At least we haven't discussed why the US government needs her help for this international incident, despite her rather shady history of working with criminals. Unlike Project Starfish and Quarter Maltese, this operation isn't exactly a secret, and the US government doesn't need operatives of dubious moral standings to go in undetected. The Commandos kinda just arrive in Pakolistan and get discovered almost immediately, despite Amanda saying that the existence of these creatures were only known to the uppermost levels of security for the last 50 years. I guess when the safety of a direct connection to petroleum deposits is at risk, we need to pull out all the stops. And even though the Superman trailer has confirmed that heroes like Green Lantern, Hawkgirl, Mr. Terrific, and Metamorpho are all agents in this film with at least 3 of them seemingly working with the government, we still needed to rely on the government's best kept secret to help eradicate this YouTube comment section. I'm sure it'll be fine. Maybe each of those previously mentioned members were all really busy that week, similar to how every time there seems to be a world-ending threat in the MCU, if it isn't an Avengers movie, then there is a fat chance any other named superhero will be attending. This isn't exactly an isolated issue for DC either. Although speaking of attendees, the reason these members of the Commandos were picked is because they no longer classify as human, and as such Amanda uses them in hopes of circumventing her restrictions. And while I do get the logic behind this line of thinking, it must just suck for people like Phosphorus and Nina to no longer be considered human despite being born as such and raised as such for the majority of their lives. I wonder if this specific line of thinking will ever be raised as a potential moral quandary later in the show's runtime, where the ethics of using such creatures will be brought into question. Or perhaps even, if you will, a discussion around the idea of what it means to be human and if my skin really does need to melt off my face before I can be considered a monster. These are all good questions that I'm sure will receive a satisfying answer. Let's go ahead and look at the reasoning behind their forced servitude. No direct reasoning is given for the bride's inclusion, however I am willing to believe that Amanda has some insight into her abilities, such as the fact she is almost 200 years old, she is highly durable and has super strength, as well as being pretty efficient with firearms and hand-to-hand combat. So far, so good. Dr. Phosphorus is stated to have irradiated skin, which he uses to burn people and objects around him. He is also the single most powerful member of the team, capable of melting almost anything, taking on armored vehicles while naked, as well as losing to an oven mitt. But that's neither here nor there. And just in case the audience was stupid or something, we see him burning a Jenga piece in his hand, despite his skull being on fire. I'm sure we will continue to see him randomly burning things just for the fuck of it. We are also told that you shouldn't give him a hug unless you want your balls to stop working. Truly the most diabolical member of this party. Next up is the Weasel. The reason he's included is because he was one of the only creatures to survive Project Starfish in Quarter Maltese, even though he drowned in that movie and spent the entire runtime passed out on the sand. I wonder if there was another creature who survived Project Starfish who may not exactly qualify as human. Maybe someone who is really strong, bulletproof, easy to control, likes the taste of human flesh, can swim, and won't die as soon as he is out of the water. Ah, silly Shandy, don't you know this is a reboot? Any preconceived thoughts and opinions need no longer apply. G.I.Robot is up next, and he is basically a superbot capable of mowing down entire squads of Nazis all by himself. But only if he is either A, told there are Nazis directly, or B, is shown any form of Nazi imagery no matter the context. They also let him keep his machine guns in this prison, which he can access at any time. I believe this is what the kids like to refer to as an oopsie doopsie. And lastly, we have Nina Mazursky, who is dead in the water. Rick Flag Sr. is chosen as the leader because who else was supposed to remind me of that one guy in a yellow shirt? After being introduced to the new Squia squad, we arrive in Pokolistan, where the bride makes us aware that she has been here before. This is what I like to call convenient, and will be discussed in more detail later. For now, let's get introduced to the personal guard of Princess Illana. Despite Pokolistan looking like it has seen better days, these guards are all kitted out in C-grade Iron Man armor, equipped with hand-mounted laser beams and jetpacks. And despite this armor being so weak that they can't even protect the people inside from basic assault rifles and RPGs that don't even need to explode on contact, I am supposed to believe this ragtag team of Eastern European support mains managed to, at some point in the near future, kill every member of the Justice League before taking control of the planet. This is what I like to call retarded. After being introduced to the personal guard as well as being audibly assaulted by Francis's Spotify playlist, we eventually make it to the palace, where the bride points out that Illana's family tree may need a little pruning. Is this set up for a potential twist that Illana is actually an illegitimate child of the royal family, taking advantage of the lack of any real leadership in the country to carry out her plans of world domination? Is this commentary on the issues of prolonged interbreeding and the consequences of a monarchy that isolates itself from the rest of the world, leading to the decay of its kingdom over time? Do I need to stop drinking energy drinks past 3 AM? Believe it or not, each of these questions has the exact same answer. There isn't one. It's just Francis once again taking an interesting plotline and making it into a joke spouted by the local Hot Topic customer. It is also supposed to be a subversion of expectations because unlike the rest of her family, Illana is at least fuckable. Speaking of expectations being subverted, I was under the impression that Francis was funny, or could at least write funny characters. But as Alexis will soon demonstrate, sometimes people change. I'm sorry, that was a little harsh. There are a few rather funny moments in the show, some of which are not exactly intentional. I just don't like the scene or its attempts at comedy. Pioneering architect and central figure in the modernist movement, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe teaches us that less is more, that simplicity and clarity are paramount when it comes to design. The same thing applies to comedy. A well-structured, well-thought-out joke doesn't need to take more than a full minute and 30 seconds to finish, especially after I understood the joke in 10 seconds. Sometimes the less I have to think about a joke, the funnier it gets. The thing that makes a scene like this even more aggravating to sit through is the idea that this show is supposed to be the first introduction to the new DCU, and it is currently failing. After lunch, we move outside where merriment and harassment take turns eating up screen time. Illana mentions how Pokolistan is backwards, always rejecting progress as corrupt, that it is her dream to lead the country into the 21st century, and how America is her inspiration to do so. This is a reference to the fact that this version of America is fictional. Following further waffle that I will talk about in the character analysis, we have Illana trying to convince Rick to follow her MySpace account. Rick declines as he only recently figured out what TikTok was and didn't need further internet-induced anxiety. Fast forward a few seconds and we have the bride jumping out of a window before I can get a better look at Nina. Despite being an Agility 8 character, her speed seems to be a solid 2, as Nina managed to catch up to her after putting her suit back on and simply walking down the stairs. Is this confirmation that she is the fastest fish alive, or is the bride simply decrepit after her long years? Doesn't matter, because instead of trying to acknowledge anything that was just shown on screen, the writer decided to firmly and quickly shade that lamp. The pair approach a security gate and convince the guard to let them both out, despite them being explicitly brought in to secure the princess and not being given clearance to leave by their superior officer. Is chain of command one of those fabled progressive ideologies? The bride also manages to luck out completely by finding the one guard in this country who carries his entire salary on him at all times in the form of fat stacks of cash. Not like I'm expecting an ASB nearby, but did we really need to cap off the first episode with this turgid writing? Oh hey, and look at that. The microsecond after leaving the castle, there's an Uber ready to pick them up. I guess we don't really have time to discuss the logistics of what we just saw on screen, because once again, the lamp has been shaded to progress the story. So, whatever. It's fight time, baby. Rick Flag Sr. in his tidy whities versus Dr. Phosphorus, the man who can melt anything except a kitchen mitt. Granted, I imagine Phosphorus is probably smart enough to know that as soon as Rick has been killed, he is sure to follow. However, he is also simultaneously not smart enough to realize that Amanda probably has a second switch and when activated if the one Rick had was destroyed. But don't you see, guys? Rick pointed out that he actually was that stupid, which means him not coming to this conclusion himself is actually fine. Who cares? The bride and Nina have finally arrived at Hotel Transylvania, I mean Castle Frankenstein, so the bride can go and dig around for her lost necklace. And... what? What the fuck do you mean that this location is found in the exact spot she traveled to for her first mission? She hasn't been here for nearly 200 years and never once considered ever coming back to get her stuff. But now that she has been tasked with an incredibly important security detail to prevent the assassination of a world leader from a hex girl who has been awaiting for an opportunity like this to show up so that she could weaken the security for Illana's castle, so that she could rock up to the front gate and kill everyone inside unopposed, she decides now was the time to get her trinket back. Shandy, she's been in prison, man. Yeah, I know. She's been in jail, and before that, she was running around the globe, up until at least 1991, despite being born in 1831. That's 160 years before any potential incarceration. Whatever, I guess that's the end of episode 1. Not exactly a great start, but maybe things will get better.
In the business, we call this foreshadowing.
Welcome to episode 2, also known as the episode where Dr. Frankenstein grooms and has his way with essentially an infant without any sort of acknowledgement from the bride that what happened to her was kinda fucked up. The episode plays around with themes of what it means to be human, and by plays around, I mean Eric states it once and then you kinda just have to ignore what happens for the other 18 minutes of the episode.
What is it to be human, if not for love?
That is a remarkably interesting question, my dear Eric. Your desire for kinship speaks not only to the building sense of loneliness you must fear as a hunk of mismatched meat strung together by a deranged scientist, but this line of thinking seems to indicate that you view yourself as more than what was just described, that your potential to explore life and unravel its mysteries may match or even someday surpass that of humanity itself. Unfortunately, in order to do so, you must explore what it means to be human, and what is more human than the need for companionship, to confide in someone, the sense of physical and emotional intimacy, allowing us to explore more of ourselves through the relationships we create with others. Please let me know. I'm trying to justify my life choices. For example, Victor Frankenstein found out that he likes them decomposing, and he may have a bit of a banned word that rhymes with incense, kink, since these are technically his children. He also must have been packing some extra personality, since it takes a combination of being placed in a familiar environment as well as being beaten within an inch of her life for the bride to remember her tantalizing tango.
You hear like a clarinet hanging from his pants.
I'm getting ahead of myself again. We've skipped basically to the end of the episode. Surely there was more to discuss in between the opening scene and the closing scene, right? Well, I mean, Rick Flag Sr. gets it on with a woman half his age. That's interesting, right? We see Circe can drink enough to make it at least halfway through Daredevil 2003.
This guy got 2 beers for a drinking game and thought, yeah, that's enough.
And we see Nina and the bride fucking around in the castle. Honestly, this episode is pretty light on stuff happening. Most of what we get is some character work and very little thematic substance that I will probably spend too much time talking about once I get to it. But the plot barely moves anywhere after the first episode. At least until we get the At least until we get the confrontation with Circe. Speaking of Circe, she does demonstrate a few interesting abilities in this fight that may be important to consider for an upcoming incident involving the only person she cares about killing. In fact, I think we can just go straight there. Episode 3 begins with Rick and the rest of the Beast Brigade arriving at Castle Frankenstein to rescue Nina and the bride, who are both within earshot and spitting distance respectively. The sons of Themyscira left them here as a distraction so that their main forces can storm Illana's castle unopposed. But why did they leave here without any sort of booby traps in place to either kill or further preoccupy the group while they storm the castle? Circe demonstrated that she was more than willing to kill the bride in her scuffle, and the sons suck at their job, so I imagine they were actually trying to kill Nina rather than just narrowly missing anything important when they hit her fishbowl. As such, the idea that they would leave without some sort of detonation device being left behind to catch the remaining members seems ill-advised. It's not even a matter of them coming unprepared, since they had prior warning and are a fully stocked militia. This is while also ignoring the obvious answer, which is Circe, a witch capable of manipulating matter. Are you telling me she can turn bullets into butterflies, but she can't strap a few C4 charges under a bathtub? It'll be fine. I'm sure this was the only time an incredibly good idea that was obviously at her disposal will be ignored for the sake of the plot, right? The Commandos rush back to the princess's castle, where we are quickly and thoroughly told that there is no way on God's green earth that these glorified housemaids are going to take over the planet if the average Jujutsu Kaisen fan can kill them with a really fast slingshot. This dude's regular, everyday jacket and t-shirt is more durable against laser beams than their armor is against assault rifles. Unfortunately, 3D printing your models isn't going to protect you from the almighty power of the vaporizing truck. Now that the continental cookies have arrived, we are quickly shown just how powerful Dr. Phosphorus is as he makes short work of his assailant by vaporizing his bullets before shish kebabbing him like Sunday lunch. Yet despite him having a permanent Halo 2 shield around him at all times, he still needs to take cover with the rest of the group behind the water fountain, even though we will see him phasing through a steel tank and several walls later in the show. Maybe it's on cooldown, maybe he's just tired after not getting any sleep the previous night, maybe they have Mario's water cannon on standby just for him, or maybe we needed him out of the way so G.I. could get his gamer moment before being game-ended himself, and the writer just couldn't think of ways to do that. So he just tosses fireballs at a window till he gets to do something meaningful. After G.I.'s pentakill, Circe arrives on scene to quickly dispatch of him with a single blast. Now keep this in mind, G.I. is completely, 100% bulletproof and has never been shown to take cover from enemy fire. It makes sense considering he is the Tin Man, yet one blast from Circe turns him into scrap metal. So I imagine that when she gets to Illana and has her in her sights, it would be a rather quick ordeal, yeah? So Circe, the almighty Amazonian sorceress, has just been shown to annihilate a bulletproof machine in one shot with her magic. This same sorceress then targets a stationary 5'3", 70-pound Eastern European girl and manages to explode everything around her, including the 2 fresh corpses Illana had just made, and only manages to barely scratch the intended target despite her window looking like that. Maybe her hand slipped. She's inside the room now and Illana is even closer to her. There's no way she lives, right? Okay, fine. You have her up against a wall. She is injured. She can't escape. You have shown a handful of times now that you possess the ability to kill her in a simple stroke of your hands. You can even make finger pistols do IRL damage. So why exactly did you go ahead and start charging the Giga Death Orbs of Death after saying to her face that you want her dead? Just fucking do it already. Why are you gloating?
There comes a time in all forms of media consumption where you are so utterly bewildered by an event taking place that there are so many things wrong with it that you don't have words and you simply laugh. When I saw this sequence for the first time, I wish I had recorded it. I burst out laughing, struggling to compose myself, and I was fundamentally blown away at what in the world I was seeing. And the kicker? I wasn't even entirely sure of why. It's like so many issues cascade on your brain at once, you are overwhelmed and you couldn't possibly pass it out in the amount of time you have left before something utterly ridiculous happens on top of what you just saw.
I always love a good barbecue.
So that's why we have videos like the one you are listening to now, to have a moment to think, to collect information and lay out what happened. Because, what the fuck?
Let's roll it back. How is the Weasel able to enter this building and find the exact room the princess is located in just in time for Circe to not cast her Giga Death Orbs of Death? How is it that the Weasel met no resistance inside the castle? We were previously shown that there was a considerable amount of fighting taking place within the building itself, not just in the courtyard. Am I to believe that not a single soldier took cover inside the palace once G.I. started raining hellfire? Or fuck it, am I to believe that literally every single troop currently available all took a defensive line on top of this balcony at the exact same time when their main goal was finding and killing the princess? And don't even get me started on Circe somehow being strong enough to withstand punches from the bride while also being tossed through several walls. But this giant fucking rat is what does her in? Now, don't get me wrong, I love the Weasel, my beloved. I just don't buy this for a second. Circe had more than enough opportunity to kill Illana and defend herself from Weasel. She just showed how she can use levitation on someone against their will. She can fire death from her fingers. She can beat people who casually toss cars in a fist fight. She can turn you into balloon animals just by touching you. But I guess none of that matters once the rats smell cheese. Oh my God. Episode 4 starts out with Rick and Illana doing the worst job at being secretive, despite Rick thinking that hooking up with Illana was unethical and Illana admitting that her country was not exactly the most progressive place on the planet, preferring to keep up certain traditions. None of them showcase any sort of discomfort or anxiety that they would be caught. It's not like Rick tries to lie to Amanda about the nature of his relationship with Illana or anything, and I get Illana is playing Rick for the long con, but you aren't exactly maintaining your espionage levels by actively going against your country's customs. Then again, it's probably more fine for her than it is for Rick, since she said she wants to bring her people out of the Stone Age, so whatever. Back at base, we are introduced to Elizabeth, the Weasel's lawyer, and the only person on the show who seems to take any sort of interest in the Weasel as a person rather than an animal. Don't ask me why though, I don't really know. She's part of something called the Freedom Project, but it's never brought up again, and despite the bride's blatant abandonment of her post, almost causing the death of herself and Nina while allowing Circe's troops to walk into Illana's castle unopposed due to the rescue operation Rick was forced to conduct, she gets a direct offer from Rick to join up with him again on any future missions, while also being promoted to group leader when Rick leaves the compound. Now that's what I call empowering. While that all went on, we are reintroduced to Eric, who is spying on the bride from the safety of his helicopter, which is hovering remarkably close to a secret government base currently housing the government's best kept secret for the last 50 years. No one questions this or notices when the helicopter randomly starts losing altitude as it spirals out of control. But back to Eric, who is on the bride's tail after this old woman alerted him to the bride's return to Castle Frankenstein at the end of episode 1. The castle, which at that moment in time was located in Pokolistan. Yet, despite being in Eastern Europe, Eric decided his search would be best conducted in this random military base, despite not being given any indication that he knew where or how to find her. But he needs to see her talking to Rick in order to become jealous enough to kill his own hired crew and follow Rick to his home, where they will become fast friends. This is so we can set up Eric saving Rick from Clayface in episode 5 and reuniting with the bride in episode 7. It's all quite calculated, you see, and well, remarkably contrived. Moving on, we have the interrogation of Circe, where Johnny Con most reminds me why I couldn't make it through episode 2 of Peacemaker on a rewatch. Amanda makes it clear that Circe can't cast spells while her hands are restrained, and I would like to know why she thinks this is remotely true. We saw her turn the bride's arms into balloons just by touching her. Am I to believe she's not physically touching her current restraints? If these were somehow Amazonian chains specifically made to hold Circe, then I could buy it. Perhaps they were forged with some sort of anti-magic material. As is, they just look like steel balls wrapped around her wrists. Oh, but don't think about that, cause didn't you hear? Amanda just called Circe a slag because of her outfit choice. These are the important issues that need to be discussed in many a detail. After some waffling, we get down to brass tacks. Circe claims that she was trying to save the world by killing Illana and offers to prove this by showing Amanda the future, with John verifying her claim by stating she is possibly clairvoyant. One thing I'm happy to give the show credit on is that Amanda doesn't rely on a maybe, and has, I have no idea how to pronounce this person's name so I'm not going to even try, a tenured professor at Terrebonne University and the world's leading scholar on Themyscira, flown in to verify Circe's claim as legitimate before accepting the offer to see the future. Except she doesn't. Instead, what happens is she does actually rely on the maybe instead of doing the smart thing and, I don't know, taking any precautions at all. Maybe restraining Circe so she can't use her unbelievable super strength to beat someone within an inch of their lives. Maybe sending someone who's a little lower on the pecking order in case Circe tries to scramble their brains. Fuck it, send Rick in. He's the only one who believes this hocus pocus the least, and you were practically convinced straight away. Hell, what exactly prevents you from sending him after you just so he can get with the program? I'm sure Circe wouldn't mind, it's not like she has anything better to do. And for the love of God, make sure you have something better than a fucking maybe before you subject yourself to mind pancaking. You appeared to have this woman on speed dial. Call her in before going into that room. Not only is, I don't know, an authority on the matter, but she has direct first-hand evidence to support Circe being able to see the future with her tsunami prediction. All that you needed to do was just switch these moments around to have a better functioning sense of cohesive thought. As if this series of chucklefuckery wasn't done yet, we have quite possibly the biggest jump to a conclusion I have ever seen. Despite Pokolistan being America's ally and Illana showing zero signs of hostility, Amanda decides the best thing to do is to assassinate her immediately, the leader of a foreign nation, without doing any sort of reconnaissance. Rick Flag offers the best possible pushback in the scenario by calling, I don't know, profession into question, because yes, despite being an authority on the matter, she nor any other outsider has ever actually been to Themyscira, because if they had, then they would have been killed to guard the island's secret. John even made it seem like the awareness of Themyscira as a real place was only a recent development.
Are you telling me the United States is now in the business of executing people for crimes they haven't committed yet?
The United States is in the business of saving the damn world by any means necessary.
Meanwhile,
got my issue over here, Waller.
It's Project Starfish, Miss Waller. It's headed towards the city, and I think it wants to feed on as many people as it can.
Not our problem. If you've destroyed Jotunheim and the records within, you've achieved the objective. Corto Maltese is no longer a U.S. ally.
If anything, the White House will consider fomenting disruption in a hostile nation of positive development.
And you can't pay attention to a word he's saying.
Real consistent moral compass you got there, Amanda. Rick gets frustrated and leaves after Amanda calls his decision-making skills into question because he doesn't want an innocent woman to die based on hearsay. And the reason Amanda calls him into question is because he slept with Illana, as if that somehow makes his case less convincing.
Okay.
We only have an hour of content left. We can't be stuck on such trivial matters. Just send him into the fucking room, you twit.
Hey, give me that. There you go. Now everyone's happy, right? Except for you, because you no longer have food. And you're ugly.
Would? After the Commandos get their new mission details, we have fast forwarded to Rick fighting Eric in his home. And while I'm on it, I understand that the show calls Eric Frankenstein in the opening credits. They are wrong. Frankenstein was the doctor who made Eric, which is why he is referred to as Frankenstein's monster. Just wanted to put that out there, but back to the fight. Eric is shown tanking shots from Rick's pistol. I'm not a firearms guy and don't know what he is shooting Eric with, but it may as well be a BB gun considering they just bounce off his skin, even though we have been shown that bullets can pierce his skin and you can even stab him with a knife. Small inconsistency aside, the fight is mostly fine, and I like the fact that Eric takes the threat of losing his eye very seriously, considering his stance on being blind in his flashback episode. The resolution is pretty neat, and I enjoy their chemistry mostly because Eric is a lot of fun. So this gets a pass from me. Nothing too obnoxious, even though the rest of the episode is kinda pish. Episode 5 is my personal favorite episode, as it is the episode with the highest concentration of Eric out of the bunch. Though the plot and overall story may be pretty weak, Eric as a character is rather enjoyable to say the least, and oddly compelling to follow in spite of his undead autism. Much like Drax or even Peacemaker in Gunn's other comic book films, Eric fills the role of the superpowered yet oblivious oaf with surprising levels of complexity behind his writing when examined further. But I'll leave that for the character analysis. We are here for the plot, and so far it's not too bad. Rick and Eric decide to scope out Professor McPherson, I can say that part, which is weird, but to see if her claims are legitimate or if she is in cahoots with Circe, providing false leads to Amanda to get the Commandos back into Bukolistan. McPherson's performance in her lecture gives Rick reason to suspect she may not be as professional as she claimed. As such, it leads him and Eric to investigate her home for clues, where they discover the body of the recently deceased, I don't know how to say this, McPherson. The real one, that is. Satisfied with this discovery, Rick calls Illana to warn her of the approaching threat, while also attempting to exit the house to alert Amanda of the deception. However, the fake McPherson arrives back home, where they transform into Clayface, a notorious shapeshifter and actor. This seals the deal for Rick, who now has all the proof he needs to call off the attack on Illana. Unfortunately, in his attempt to exit the building, he and Eric are caught and beaten within an inch of their lives by the incredibly powerful Clayface, with Eric barely being able to defeat him by connecting his index finger to a power outlet. With Rick's final words before he passes out, he asks Eric to tell the bride the truth and hopefully avoid another international incident. While all of this was going on, we also follow the remaining members of the Commandos as they return to Bukolistan. They inform Alexei that they believe there is another credible threat to Illana's life. However, the nature of what it is classified information. Alexei has no choice but to accept and escort them back to the castle. However, at the same time this is going on, Rick has already informed the castle of the Commandos' intent, which then gets relayed to Alexei, who tries steering the Commandos to an isolated section of the city, where they can set up an ambush. It is impromptu, but they did the best they could given the situation. The situation being fucked beyond belief, as Dr. Phosphorus and the bride decimate many of the soldiers they come into contact with, leaving the Weasel and Nina to flee the scene. And I can't help but notice how this faction of the Bukolistan military has significantly better resources than what was found at the palace during Circe's siege. These soldiers come equipped with standard assault rifles and gear, as well as helicopters and tanks, all of which would offer significantly greater resistance to the Sons of Themyscira compared to these rinky-dink pieces of shit suits of armor. The only time they seem to be useful is when the bride hijacks a pair of gauntlets from one of the guards and immediately decimates everyone around her, including the pilot for the helicopter, who she shoots through the glass. Now keep in mind, these exact same gauntlets just a few episodes ago couldn't pierce some dude's dress jacket and t-shirt, yet here she is blowing up steel helmets and reinforced glass. So either this random dude in episode 3 had a magical barrier protecting him from lasers, or these things are incredibly inconsistent. Because if all of the gauntlets did as much damage as the bride is currently demonstrating, then I don't think the Sons would have been able to be as much of a credible threat without the aid of Circe. Now this could be fixed simply by having someone in the show saying that the Sons were in fact boosted with enchanted gear, courtesy of Circe, allowing them to inflict a lot of damage while barely taking any themselves. The only issue with this suggestion is that it's complete rubbish. We see Illana kill 2 members with just a flintlock pistol, and the Commandos are clearly shown cleaning house. What I'm asking is for Francis to redraft his script. Besides that, the episode is again not very heavy on the plot, however it makes up for it by having much neater character work for Eric than any of the other Commandos so far. I say thus far because episode 6 focuses on my second favorite character. The episode continues with the search for the Commandos as we follow Phosphorus ducking and diving between buildings, till he eventually decides to do the smart thing and burn a hole into a door before entering the building. His plan is to wait out the night before making his way towards the castle in the morning. While hanging around, he is met up with a small girl who takes a liking towards her new skeleton friend. Nothing much happens to him till morning, where he asks the small girl's parents for directions to the castle that is very clearly visible to him from the front lawn. I guess he just wanted to be a bit more casual about chucking their daughter into the air. Meanwhile, Nina managed to run into the bride while narrowly avoiding the guards. I get that the bride was shown looking for Weasel and Nina in the previous episode, but considering that Nina kinda lucks her way into finding the bride in such a large city, it does seem a bit contrived that she finds herself not only in the bride's company once again, but also managed to find a safe haven not more than 3 meters from them, just in time for the guards to narrowly miss them, again. I am a squirrel who tends to be more forgiving of luck and coincidence in my media, though even I have my limits, and considering my patience has been thoroughly tested during my time watching the show, my levels of acceptance and forgiveness need a bit of a refresher. The building the duo find themselves in happens to be a whorehouse, where the madam agrees to shelter them from danger after the bride offers her some unneeded poppy-toppy. Much like Phosphorus, the pair decided to wait out the night in this bunker of sorts till it is safe for them to meet up with the guys in the woods. While waiting, the whorehouse is paid a visit by a couple of loud mouth breathers who happen to have superpowers. The puffiest of the yappers decided he wanted to up the ante on his foreplay, but his host ran out of chips. What follows is a brief scuffle between the wind vacuum, the madam, Nina, and the smaller wind vacuum before the bride interjects with a gun. Call me silly if you will, but if the entire point of hiding here was to remain as anonymous as possible, then setting off a firearm is probably the last thing you would want to do. It's not like the bride is capable of ripping their arms off and piercing their chest with ease or anything. Another smaller issue with the scene is there's an odd bit of inconsistency with the space available in the room, and it's not the first time this has happened. The show likes to play around with perceived distance between characters, and in this case is willing to teleport the bride a few meters so the muzzle windmill can punt her through the wall. It doesn't really affect anything about the scene, but it was a bit strange. After doing the Moshi Monster the same way Raiden did Senator Armstrong, the pair decided to leave with the bride sporting a new outfit in the form of less clothing. As for Weasel, he was playing fetch with wolves in the forest. Does this make sense? Maybe, I don't actually know. What I do know is I thought it was funny. As such, this is objectively the best written scene in the show based on my subjective feelings. There's also Rick Flag in a hospital who manages to somehow live through this. Eric, the Goliath that he is, was kind enough to drop him off before commandeering a plane to Bukolistan. At least he was nice enough to tip. And that's episode 6. Nothing else to talk about. Time for the finale. The Commandos manage to scale a guard tower which happens to have access to all of the available cameras in the castle so they can plan their route to the princess. Now, normally, this kind of security would be manned by 2 people if one of them is looking out at the front window so that at least someone can view the cameras at all times. Considering the circumstances, it wouldn't hurt to put more than 2 people in here just in case the one guard on comms misses something. Then there is also B, the fact that the surveillance room wouldn't be located at the front fucking gate, which can easily be attacked from all manner of outside sources, such as people scaling your front fucking door. You'd think that after the attack by the Sons of Themyscira, just earlier that week, they'd do a better job securing their castle. It doesn't take that long to move a few monitors and keyboards, just saying. Communication during a full-scale assault is incredibly vital information for securing your ranks. It should not be this easy to access. And why for the love of God is there no one securing the outside perimeter? Why are taxi cabs just allowed to drive up to the front gates? You people have fucking tanks and helicopters at your disposal with a very credible threat to your princess's life walking around town. Even 7'5" bumfuck Eric can scale your castle in broad daylight without anyone noticing. Are you for real? And look, I understand why this room is here and why they accessed it as easily as they did. The bride needed to see Clayface on the monitor and somehow know who that was so that she can confront Illana at the end of the episode and have a justified reason for killing her. It's just that this is very lazy, but whatever, I don't think about it too hard because look, Eric, he's finally reunited with the bride and is about to spill the... Oh, no, never mind, I guess.
Oh, can it, Ghost Rider?
We better get out of here in case somebody heard those shots.
Oh, now you care about people hearing gunfire, despite the bride being smart enough to equip suppressors this time before letting her lead fly. And people actually hear it this time. That's incredible. Granted, they may have noticed because of Eric screaming, but the episode very clearly seems to indicate they heard the shots since those sound effects can still be heard when we cut back to the guards' reactions. That's fantastic. The crew find their point of entry and make their way to the back of the castle so that Phosphorus can melt his way through the outer wall. Wait, actually, that just made me think. Why did you guys know the surveillance room was located here? Did Alexei tell you in episode 1, or is it just that easy to scope out from the city? Please let it be option number 2. As the picket pikemen make their way into the castle, we cut back to Illana, who is getting ready for her Sunday swim. Oh, What the fuck do you mean her Sunday swim? She's getting invaded by the ghoul guardsmen who have routinely demonstrated their uncanny ability to just ignore conventional combat and even casually defeated an all-powerful witch on your front lawn. Yet you are so confident in your security that you are willing to sack it for a Manu in your private pool. I also ignored this part in the previous episode for the sake of ham, but Sergei did actually insist she hide in her personal private bunker. For those of you who needed a reminder, a bunker is a defensive military fortification designed to protect people and valued materials from falling bombs, artillery, or other attacks. Bunkers are also almost always underground. Illana has access to a fortified container shielding her from outside attacks, which is hidden underground. Yet despite this incredibly useful asset, she just decides to ignore it for some fucking reason. She states it's because she wants the people to see her so she can set an example for them to follow. But as Sergei clearly puts it, no one is here to see her except her own soldiers. Soldiers who probably would prefer it if the person they were guarding made it in any way easier for them to guard her. Oh Shandy, you see, she needs to be here so that Nina can attempt to kill her because she is the water Pokemon, you see. We need her to do something useful for once in this. Oh, for fuck's sake, never mind then. What exactly caused this to happen? Surely it wasn't all just Nina's fault that she served no meaningful function this entire show. Well, let's just roll it back ever so slightly. The Devil detachment made it through the wall without anyone on the outside ever doing a perimeter sweep on the weakest part of their wall, but shh, episode's nearly done. They see Illana getting ready for the fattest Manu this side of Whangarei, and Weasel starts having conniptions. In the previous episode, it was established that Weasel took a liking to Illana because she reminded him almost one-to-one of the small girl who fed him and became his friend in his backstory episode. As we were shown multiple times in that episode, Weasel feels really guilty about not saving her life, and this seems to be affecting his judgment in this episode, as he tries to save Illana from her would-be assassin, causing the death of Nina as a result. A distraught bride walks up to Nina's body as it lays lifeless in the pond. The bride was the one to convince Nina to commit the deed and holds herself personally responsible for the result. However, before any more blood can be spilled, Sergei approaches the bride with a radio from Amanda. They had made a mistake. During this entire kerfuffle, Waller and Economos make their way to Dr. McPherson's home. Rick Flag had woken up from his coma and alerted Waller to her mistake. In order to verify what he said, she investigates the house on her own. Why the fuck she would do that after seeing the state that Rick was in is beyond me. She is the head of Argus. She has people to do these things for her. What is John supposed to do if Clayface was still conscious? Whack him with his cane? Waller finds McPherson's corpse, now starting to rot, causing her to doubt the visions from Circe and calling off the Commandos. Could you imagine how the show would have gone if Waller was in any way more intelligent than a freshly baked potato? If she had sent the Commandos to do reconnaissance and gather intelligence on the princess to verify Circe's claims before killing Illana? Imagine if the Commandos had discovered plans for world domination. The bride speaks the local language. It isn't a far shoot to suggest that she can read it too. Hell, Nina was set up to be incredibly intelligent in the first episode. Her backstory even said that she can speak 4 languages. Imagine if she was the one to uncover some sort of plot, leading the Commandos to take charge of the situation and kill Illana out of their own accord, narrowly being stopped by Waller after following Rick's personal investigation. The show has stated on multiple occasions that the Commandos do not care for humans. It would have been entirely within their character to do things they wanted to or felt was necessary to further their own personal status. The bride had just been given command of the team despite her folly in the first 3 episodes. She's already been conditioned to understand that performing well in her task can get her rewarded, and what would possibly garner her more good faith than stopping World War III? Nina has been struggling with her position as a monster, not feeling comfortable with her association with the Commandos, but steadily forming a friendship with the bride over the last week due to their shared experiences. Nina even gets manipulated by the bride to kill Illana, as she was the only one who could swim. The bride relies on Nina's desire for connection to help spur her on, calling her the biggest monster of the group, despite previously claiming she was the most human. The groundwork is all there. You could have made all of this make sense if you just worked on it a bit more instead of assaulting me with so many fucking flashbacks. Or just, make your show longer. We skip a little bit in time to where everyone has been brought into the castle. Weasel is celebrated as a hero for stopping the attempted assassination by getting Nina killed and biting Phosphorus. And it just highlights to me how incredibly inconsistent his powers actually are. He has qualms about being touched because, as he says in this very very scene, people's hands would melt if they touched him. Yet despite that, we have seen him holding a small child by the waist repeatedly without harming her. But even just punching him resulted in Rick's hand being burnt. So which is it? Is he actually hot enough to give you second and third degree burns just by briefly touching him? Or is the fact you have the thinnest possible bit of material to cover him with enough to prevent you from being burnt? Screw the oven mitt, that can at least protect your hands from 180 degree plus metallic objects. This little girl should be sweating because of how hot her dress is. Who even cares at this point? Well, I guess I do because I just said it.
Okay.
We finally get to the reveal, the part where the bride accesses 110% of the brain I wish Waller had, where she unveils the single most contrived, Rube Goldberg-esque plan I've seen in a while. Instead of capturing Circe and executing her for crimes committed on Pocolistan soil, something she would very much be in the right to do, Illana plays on Rick's affection for her and tries to get him to kill Circe instead. When that doesn't play out, she just allows Circe to be taken into American custody, and instead of hiring a shape-shifting murderous hitman capable of infiltrating most secure facilities and tasking them with, oh, I don't know, killing Circe in her cell before she can reveal her vision, maybe blaming it on the sons of Themyscira as payback for leading them into ruin, and not allowing them to see the most beautiful, sexiest waterfalls on the planet, she hires him to take on the persona of a leading scholar on Themyscira that Waller already spoke to. Instead of tasking one of the many faceless knights Illana has access to in her very large castle to do this espionage mission, she sends one of the 2 knights that ever showed their face to the Commandos, the same knight who had some rather merry fun with the bride the same day she arrived. And instead of trying to hide his very clearly recognizable scar on his chin with a fake beard or some makeup, he just does the Captain America and thinks it will fucking work. The worst part is, it almost does. But not because it was a clever plan or because they had luck on their side, it's because the good guys are so retarded. And I say good guys with the biggest quotation marks I have, because what the hell do you mean you are going to assassinate the leader of an allied nation based on little more than she said, he said? Oh, but she can see the future. Yeah, and she's also an evil witch who has been arrested at least once for attacking Metropolis and trying to end the legitimate rule of an allied nation. Her enforcers are sexist fanatics who agreed to working with her so that they could see waterfalls on a fictional island. There was no reason to believe her on the fucking spot. The only part of Illana's plan that I will give some form of credit to is trying to dissuade Rick from Waller's and by extension Circe's schemes by repeatedly trying to get on his flag. I'm not going to give her credit for using Clayface because the only reason that worked is because Rick was in order to drink from the Circe Kool-Aid himself as the leader of the Commandos. If Waller had done any form of reconnaissance, or even if she just asked Rick to keep an eye out on McPherson to make sure she was legitimate, then this plan would have blown up faster than I can say, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell button for notifications. It's a stinky reveal. I guess we are just back to pretending guns don't make sounds when they are fired. Illana was just so cocksure about her plan succeeding that she never considered keeping an armed guard until the Commandos left. God, I hate this episode so much. Coincidentally, it's also the episode where Eric gets shot and Phosphorus is bitten. No, I am not biased. So despite walking away from Illana's private study in somewhat of a hurry, despite slamming the face of this literal who, and despite leaving the castle without any form of goodbye, none of the guards ask, where is the beef? Maybe they're just about as sick of this shit as I am. Phosphorus just petted the bride without her arm bursting into flames, despite fire being the Frankenstein's biggest weakness.
Okay.
Damn, all it took was some haughty princess to turn Flag into a complete moron. Dudes, am I right?
Sure, John.
No, show, I do not accept this gaslighting from you. Rick was the only one in that situation acting sensibly. You don't just order someone's execution because a lady with matter manipulation and mind-piercing abilities with an incredibly convenient and sketchy ability to read the future told you it was a good idea. Stop it. Why the fuck is Weasel here? He disobeyed a direct order, got one of his teammates killed, maimed the other, and almost inadvertently destroyed the planet by saving Illana. He's a rabid dog who will attach himself to anybody who reminds him of his childhood friends or if they play fetch with him enough. Honestly, it tracks that if the decision is stupid and carries very little thought about the potential consequences, it will be picked 100% of the time in this show.
for service, ma'am.
Look at dumb hair go.
Not even a double whammy, we went for the triple threat of silly. Firstly, we have the G.I.Robot fakeout. Or, secondly, because I already mentioned the first one. Secondly, we have the G.I.Robot fakeout. Not only does this reveal cheapen his death by making any sort of emotional attachment to his character feel completely worthless at this point, since anytime he gets destroyed, he can just be built back together as long as his head is still operational, but it also inadvertently harms Nina as well. Nina had a fleeting friendship with G.I. and was the only member of the group to really care about him. It made for a touching scene when G.I. rescued Nina from Castle Frankenstein, since it showed he possessed the ability to form new connections with other people after he left Easy Company. G.I. wasn't ordered to do this. He assigned his own directive based on the relationship he formed with Nina in episode 1. This was also important for Nina's development as a character because it steadily shaped her as the emotional core of the group. When G.I. passes, we see this really hurt Nina. Her connection to her teammates and her willingness to be more vulnerable around them allowed a means of exploring the humanity in the rest of the group. However, the fact that G.I. is alive and nobody, not even the bride, makes a comment about how Nina would be glad he made it is annoying. They don't even tell him she died. We don't even know if this is the same G.I. that went to Pakistan and not just a memory hold version of him. Maybe I'm looking too much into this, but it genuinely just annoys me how little impact Nina had on the cast or even on the mission. And speaking of little impact, the show just did something very funny. Remember how Waller said that on land, Nina wasn't that useful, but if you get her in the water, it was a different story? And then the one time she was in the water, she fucking died? Anytime there was a conflict on land, she had to hide and was almost killed like 3 times if it wasn't for the aid of her comrades. Well, wouldn't it be really awkward if there was a character who was previously established to breathe on land and in water, was practically bulletproof, easy to control, and liked the taste of human flesh, just chilling in a cell back home? Nah, they wouldn't make Nina that fucking useless, right? Oh, but Shandy, Nina wasn't useless. You just said she allowed G.I. to start forming attachments again. Yeah, though Waller doesn't need him to do that. Neither did Rick. They just needed him to shoot the things they called Nazis. And he did that job really well. Oh, but she was the one who informed Rick of where they were at the end of episode 2. Yeah, and Rick had trackers in their bodies which allowed him to know where they were at all times. And since Anawe is a really big boy, they would probably have left him to guard Illana while they were gone, meaning she wouldn't have nearly been shish kebabbed by a really fast rock. Oh, but she convinced the bride to save the whorehouse from those 2 metahumans. No, she didn't. The bride only got involved once Nina was in trouble, because she liked her. Nina also didn't do anything to change the outcome of their stay there, since the bride actively ignored everything she said until they left. Oh, but Nina dying is what drove the bride to killing Illana because her friend was murdered in self-defense. Yeah, and Anawe doesn't need a knife, nor does he need to be convinced into eating things. Sometimes he will try and do it to his own friends, when he is hungry enough. Basically, what I am saying is that this show did a massive disservice to Nina in terms of her impact on the plot, and introduced a character that basically negs her in every aspect of her involvement in the show. Could this have been avoided? Sure, Nina could have had a more active role and served a greater function beyond just the emotional fish who makes people feel better. If we took the espionage angle, she could have served as a really good spy, being able to get in and out of the castle via their built-in water systems. If every single person in this place didn't all just speak English, she could have acted as a translator who speaks 4 languages to help mediate. If her impact on her friends made them take actions they weren't already going to do in the first place, I would have given slightly more of a shit when she died. There could have been a few reasons to have her come along instead of Anawe, though, as is, King Shark is just the better choice, especially during the first 3 episodes of the show. You know, the section of the story where they have to fight off a small militia who all have guns. It is genuinely just such a waste of time. So that's the plot. And besides a few moments that I really enjoyed, it's a mess. I get Francis isn't known for having the most airtight stories, but come on. As an introduction to his new world, it is a very weak start and makes me nervous for how Superman, a film I was actually excited to see, will turn out. But even if the plot is a mess, even if some characters don't make sense, one thing the majority of people seem to agree on is that his character writing is pretty damn neat. Or at least they used to. So, how do the characters in this show hold up?
We're all standing up now.
bunch of jackasses standing in a circle.
I would like to tackle this subject by discussing the main cast in order from weakest to strongest. This means I will have something to look forward to during the writing and editing of this video, as well as getting some of the dustier characters out of the way quicker. I won't be covering every character in the show, even if they have speaking lines. Sorry, Alexi, you didn't make the cut. I was debating discussing Waller, but really I feel like her character can be summed up as one big fuck up, and honestly, I've discussed her entire involvement already. So, without further delay, let's get on with it.
We're bad guys. It's what we do.
Starting off this list strong, we are discussing an entire faction of people rather than any individual character. This is because I am actually appalled at how awful they are as a group, especially once I learned what their comic book counterparts were like. And I don't mean awful as in they do bad things. I mean awful as in they aren't characters. These aren't people with their own goals and ambitions who have anything remotely resembling an understandable motivation. They are parodies, fictional straw men meant to poke fun at specific YouTube people with about as much subtlety as a red clay brick through your front window. I don't take issue with writers including inserts of people they don't like IRL and making fun of them, as long as they put the effort in needed to make them their own characters, capable of being viewed and enjoyed outside of Le Funny own. These twits remind me more of Taserface from Guardians of the Galaxy 2, a worthless character who is only included into the plot so the main character can make a joke at their expense, easily defeating them and letting them go out with a sodomized whimper. The only difference here is that Taserface isn't, as far as I am aware, meant to represent a single real person or collection of people. The Sons are, doubling their effective levels of cringe. They are mouth-breathing imbeciles whose only function in the story is to squad wipe Illana's entire battalion of guards and then to die to the actual characters. They are fodder, and unlike other fictional red shirts whose only purpose is to make the main characters look cool, these cretins possess nothing I would ever associate with the word entertaining. If you would like more of a breakdown and explanation of the Sons comic book iteration, I do discuss them in my previous video, where I am actually nice to Francis.
Take it you've got a plan?
No, I just like to stare at rotting flesh.
Next up is the brood mother of the mouth breathers, Circe. She is the main antagonist for the first 3 to 4 episodes of the show. Her main goal is to kill Illana because of a vision she had showing Illana ending the world. In terms of personality, she is sadistic and cruel, taking pleasure in harming others simply for her own amusement. This character flaw, if you can call it that, tended to get her into trouble a lot and would often lead to some remarkable fuck-ups. She's an evil witch. An itch, if you will. She manipulated an entire faction of simps to do her bidding, though considering how easily she can make them swoon simply by not passing out after one drink, I doubt she had to say much. It helps that the Sons aren't actual characters themselves, else they might have asked why a woman born on Themyscira who wanted to take control of Themyscira was so willing to let outsiders in, especially if they were in any way accurate to the books. Despite Circe's predisposition for murder and mayhem, even she seems to care about life to a certain extent, from saving a segment of her sisters from a tsunami to preventing the end of the world. Circe, for as bland as a character she is, does present an interesting theme to the story that is reflected in a few other characters. What does it take to become a monster, and are all monsters created equally? After all, she does share a few similarities with at least one of the Commandos. She is vicious, cruel, and capable of great violence. She can easily amass a reasonable sized force to do her bidding, simply because she had the power to do it. She is also capable of performing acts of altruism to save a planet she doesn't much care for, because even the devil doesn't want to see the world burn. Yet she is never referred to as a monster. Makes ya think. Only other thing to comment on here is her choice of outfit. Now, Amanda doesn't seem to understand the need for such a revealing outfit, but I do. See, I believe that physicality reflects inner state, and the reason men love goth women so much is because their outer appearance showcases who they are within, which is to say, evil. This joke may or may not be stolen, but I thought it was appropriate. Leave your ats at the door.
Let's stop there. You know what? I woke up this morning thinking about a public execution.
Illana Rostovic, the acting monarch of Pokolistan, is the secret primary antagonist of the entire season, who masks her true sadistic, narcissistic and power-hungry personality behind a veil of kindness, compassion, and a desire for change in her country. Illana spends the first few episodes manipulating the Commandos and successfully manages to get Rick and Weasel to fall for her charms, allowing both characters to be key elements in almost preventing her assassination. Her entire gambit for this ruse to work is to portray herself as a benevolent leader who cares for the betterment and enrichment of her people. She is willing to put herself in harm's way to achieve this goal, which would ultimately benefit her in the long run, as it would avoid drawing suspicion until she was able to complete her plans for world domination. At least that was the theory. In reality, her overconfidence in her perceived benevolence is ultimately what gets her killed by the bride, despite the direct order from Waller to stand down. By overly exposing herself to the Commandos, it puts her into a position where they can attempt an assassination on her life, leaving her no other choice but to defend herself. Unfortunately for Illana, she is rather sloppy. Because of her inability to take any sort of precautions to make sure her plans remain incognito, she almost seems to want people to know what she is doing. Her pursuit of Rick Flag is incredibly blatant with little room for subtlety. In a better show, this would have clued Waller in that there was something foul about her intentions. Rather, her sleeping with Rick is just used as a quick gotcha to dismiss a very real contention with a rather stupid jump to conclusion, and that is never mentioned again until the bride's last encounter with Illana. She has access to a much larger pool of resources, such as a number of tanks and helicopters she never seems to use to defend her castle during the initial siege, or even the very useful bunker that just gets ignored, a ploy likely put in place to make her seem even more fragile and innocent. At least, I hope that was intentional. Then of course you have the brilliant placement of the security room being just above the front gate, as well as having what some people in the business would refer to as damning evidence being so easily accessible. I'm fine with the idea of Illana not being a perfect antagonist. She can make mistakes. She can rely on luck when it presents itself. If there is a consistent implementation of a character flaw that someone like Waller or the bride can use to their advantage, I'm game. The problem is that what we get is fucking stupid to the point of being comical. She is incapable of thinking on the spot. She is not able to appeal to any sense of reason. She can't argue for shit. Oh, this is all feeling a little familiar. Point is, she's not a good antagonist, and I do not think she is well written. Any preconceived complexity or layers to her writing can easily be explained by saying she's just retarded.
Oh, 5 years ago, I had a heart attack. I dropped right in the middle of my backswing.
The commander of Task Force M is also arguably the weakest of the bunch, simply because he doesn't have a lot going on. He is a military man, served when he was 18 and stayed in the force because the pay was good. He had no real goals or ambitions, simply doing what he thought was necessary to provide for his own, until his son came of age. Rick Flag Jr. allegedly joined up because he wanted to serve his country and do good for his people. Senior felt like his son was an improvement on him in every way, glimmering with pride at the man he became. It also adds an element of tragedy that he outlived his son while being an admitted weaker version of him. Rick initially seemed like an isolated man, preferring to focus on his work rather than dwelling on the past, but this aspect of him falls away in short order once he starts talking to Illana. Perhaps he reserves himself around Waller due to the nature of his work. Maybe he blames her for his son's death. And, I mean, in this line of work, that thought should have crossed his mind at least once or twice. He has a shorter temper than his son, and I have a sneaking suspicion he is more likely to crack under pressure, if you catch my meaning. However, much like his son, he does stand by a set of principles, which prevents him from murdering supposedly innocent women based on the prophecy of an itch. Besides that, there isn't anything about his character that is even remotely interesting. He is the soldier archetype. He follows orders and completes the mission. There is groundwork for more substantial character development. If there was ever a discussion around the reasons why he works in the same line of work as his son, or if we ever examined his guilt further beyond, hey, I think you would have really liked fucking my son. I do like his chemistry with Eric, though that's probably because it's Eric. We never get any introspection from Rick at the end of the season after he nearly prevented the bride from completing her mission. Does he feel an element of regret for doubting Waller, or does he stand by his decision because Waller's call was made far too hastily? For one of the most human characters on the show, he doesn't get a lot of the spotlight. That all went to the flashbacks.
I'm sorry. I took it too far. I meant trash, Panda.
I like the Weasel. I think he is a funny little guy who does funny little rat things. I do not like his backstory. In The Suicide Squad, Weasel is introduced as an anthropomorphic dog-looking thing that Harley confuses for a werewolf. He serves no real function to the story besides being a gag character who dies in the first 15 minutes, only to be brought back to life by the grace of God near the end. We are also told he killed 27 children, which really makes you question just how harmless he is. He was the first real example of a monster character, just a creature going about his business, following his nature. Then Francis started complicating things. According to Weasel's flashback, he didn't kill anyone. In fact, he is actually harmless and spends the entirety of his time playing with small children as they feed him snacks. Really makes the scene where he fucking demolishes Circe feel weird in retrospect though, doesn't it? That is until Old Man Maggie, the local mushroom picker, decides, I don't like the look of this fucking thing, so now neither should you. And during this entire escapade, not only is Weasel able to recognize the danger he is in and actively dodges gunfire, but he's been around enough gender reveal parties to know how an explosion can start and attempts to save the life of the girl most closely resembling Illana. We are then shown him valiantly attempting to get her to safety as the police officers who are brought onto the scene to save these kids' lives attempts to do so by directly opening fire on them. Any Americans watching this, feel free to make your own jokes. I like being monetized. It's not just bad enough that the popo do this, but they also actively ignore the girl calling out for help in front of them so they can arrest the Afghan hound. What did Francis mean by this? The entire backstory is quite frankly hilarious and annoys me to no end because why did you try and make the big rat dog looking thing sympathetic? Why couldn't he have just been a monster? Especially since you try and force me to care about everyone in this cast of creatures by demanding I watch unskippable cutscenes that get in the way of the actual plot. Oh, it's because you needed fucking something to stop Nina from killing Illana so we could have even more pointless drama and kill off the single most useless member on the team. Great, this is the only meaningful thing Weasel does all season, besides being the one to initiate a fight with Circe and almost winning. And the best part is, you didn't need this worthless backstory to get that point. Nina comments on how Weasel feels affectionate towards Illana because of how much attention she gave him, constantly feeding him and playing fetch with him, which in this continuity seems to be the universal signal for making friends. But in reality, the reason why Weasel saves her life is because she reminds him of the girl he couldn't save in the flashback. It's such an incredible waste of time that could have been better spent fleshing out the characters that actually could use more work. You know, like your antagonist?
Is it rude if I say that you kind of look like a Lego brick separator 630?
G.I. is the first character where I don't have any particular problems with him as a character, but rather just the stuff around him. The reason for that is because he is pretty straightforward. He is an AI system with a hint of vague self-awareness. Despite his primary objective of killing Nazis, he is shown being capable of forming attachments with others, namely the boys of Easy Company, and then with Nina. He is even capable of expressing joy and claims to understand concepts like disappointment and pleasure. However, unlike more notable robot characters, G.I. isn't shown having some sort of arc or change in his demeanor, staying strictly within the confines of his directive. I don't take issue with any of this per se, but do find him to be a bit boring as a result. Something which could have been interesting to explore is G.I.'s mental state following his incarceration for the murder of 32 men. He did seem to have a lawyer present during his trial, so maybe we could have had a scene of him explaining to his lawyer why he did what he did and why he believes he shouldn't be punished. It would be nice of the show to make an attempt at arguing why what he did was bad and trying to explain that to him, only for him to disagree due to his limited understanding of the way the world works. You know, some kind of drama besides killing the next incarnation of Groot. His backstory was fine, if a bit long.
You see, I love this song, and I can't smile. Or cry.
Ah, l'affiche. What a complete waste of a character. Nina Mazursky was born with a rare, severe lung condition that saw her spending the majority of early childhood wearing an oxygen machine, which often weighed as much as she did. This was until her father and renowned scientist Edward Mazursky attempted an experimental treatment which would allow her to breathe again by infusing her DNA with something that doesn't get specified. Whatever it was turned her into metahuman amphibian, granting her the ability to breathe underwater, see in the dark, and make me act up at dubious hours of the night. Nina's condition when she was younger was too much for her mother, Lily Mazursky, who saw Nina's life as prolonged suffering, even suggesting that Nina need not live through the torture anymore if they simply ended her pain. Edward flat out refused and took every step he possibly could to ensure Nina lived as normal a life as physically possible, leaving Lily no choice but to split apart from the pair because she couldn't handle it anymore. Really winning every Mother of the Year award this time around, aren't you, Lily? Such is life in the zone. After Nina's amphibious transformation, Edward thought it was best to send her to school to try and socialize with other kids. Small problem though, children, especially fictional ones, are assholes. As Nina spends the next few years of her school career being relentlessly bullied, despite easily being the single most interesting thing in the county, I find it difficult to believe that she didn't make a single friend during her time here. I get the whole frog thing, but I've seen kids with mullets make friends. With a little confidence, anything is possible. Nina is supposed to be incredibly book smart, fluent in 4 languages and an adept reader of Shakespeare. Are you telling me not a single person wanted her to join their D&D game? Whatever. Eventually Nina could no longer handle the bullying and decided to leave for the wider world of her local pond, not more than a 5-minute drive from the house. During her time away from people, she learned to further advance her abilities, becoming a more adept swimmer, and learning to survive off sea life, seemingly without any ill side effects. Makes you wonder what a version of the show where she was an actual spy would look like, but I guess my aquatic snake eater fanfiction will have to remain in the drafts. Eventually Nina gets caught by experts and her dad kinda dies because apparently the police of Bloodhaven have never heard of stun guns or understanding the incredibly complex language known as basic fucking English. This guy knows the creature and is calling her out by name, claiming she can't breathe out of the water. I'm sorry, but does the term renowned scientist just not carry any weight in this place? I'm pretty sure the madman who turned his daughter into a fish before sending her to a prestigious school and losing her a few months later would be really common knowledge in this place. Or at least someone on the news could have put 2 and 2 together concerning this mysterious creature's identity. I mean, for fuck's sake, she was playing lacrosse in a Sandy Cheeks fishbowl. How hard could this have been? Whatever, what does the story tell us about Nina? Well, for one, not a lot. We are told she is shy, self-conscious, and generally doesn't like people. Congrats, you spent about 10 minutes of a 20-minute episode establishing something we already figured out in the first episode. But thanks for telling me she had a shitty childhood. I'm sure this was meant to make me care more about her as a tragic creature of circumstance before getting her abdomen circumcised. Except I didn't. Not just because the editing is quite frankly fucking awful to sit through as we constantly jump between different POVs with the patented Francis Spotify playlist being put on to nauseating effects, but there was really nothing about Nina as a character that makes her death meaningful. It was supposed to elicit a feeling of regret from the bride, that she felt horrible about the only member of her group with any redeeming qualities being the only one to die. Problem with this is that the bride and Nina aren't really friends, like not real ones. They are co-workers who get into 2 separate instances of tomfoolery. The bride doesn't really know Nina, and I'm not going to buy that gish gallant attempt at understanding her because she's really good at reading people. Bride has no real connection to Nina, or vice versa, because any character work that could have been done to establish meaningful connections between the two, much like how Francis has demonstrated in his other works with characters who had about as much screen time as Nina did in this entire show, was saved purely for the flashbacks. Instead of Nina and the bride bonding over their shared loss of family and their ostracization from the rest of humanity as they search for the bride's necklace in episode 2, we get Nina cheeked up on a Tuesday afternoon and the bride piped down on a Wednesday morning. Neither of them confide in each other during downtime. They don't entrust secrets to one another, monster to monster. I mean shit, we could have had a scene where Nina started quoting a line from Shakespeare that comforts her or reminded her of her dad, someone who was really special to her. And instead of scoffing again and generally being a bitch, the bride could have followed up with a quote of her own or even finished Nina's, implying that Victor read her Shakespeare as well. It would have given them something to bond over and would continue to explore themes of what it actually means to be a monster. But no! Instead, you should be sad because Nina had her marvelously shaped buttocks saved by the bride like 3 separate times. Yet the only time she is given an element of responsibility and agency, she fucks up harder than I do trying to fry bacon in the dark. Missed opportunities don't even begin to cut it. This was just a mistake.
I'll splash you with icy and salty slush as I drive by in my evil but warm Ford Bronco SUV.
Speaking of the bride, let's have a chat about her. Unlike Nina, the bride is more straightforward and a bit easier to break down. She was created by Victor Frankenstein in a similar fashion to Eric, and the intention was to have her become Eric's new bride. However, she didn't accept Eric, who frightened her since the day she was born, instead forming a relationship with Victor. He taught her to read, to write, how to speak, and how to understand her feelings. Her bond with him quickly turned romantic, leading Eric to killing Victor out of jealousy and what some would describe as revenge. Now, without her father/lover's guidance, she was forced to roam the world on her own, as a means of trying to get away from Eric, who chased in her footsteps until her eventual capture by Argus. But see, I have an issue with her backstory. Well, I have like 2 issues, though one sticks out to me. Bride's big thing this season is how she is a monster, and that she doesn't feel any specific attachments to humans. Viewing them as pests, she'd be more than willing to squish, and while I would love to be squished between her thighs, this behavior does not line up with her backstory. Her only relationship was with a human. Her backstory shows her being a merchant in 1852, frequenting a bar in 1880, being a field medic in World War II, so on and so forth. Her backstory seems to indicate that she very much did care about people, so something had to have happened to spark this change in demeanor. Was it the fact that she was captured by Argus, forced to witness how horribly monsters were treated in a society run predominantly by humans, whether they deserved it or not? Does she view their nature as barbaric and cruel, sensing hypocrisy in their behavior as they accused monsters of being inhumane, despite her never committing any single action that was even remotely close to the horrors she saw inflicted by other humans onto humans? She lived through 2 world wars, as well as a number of subsequent world events that very much could have helped shape this viewpoint. Or was it something more personal? Did she view Eric's attempts at trying to become more human through his relationship with the bride as the reason for his monstrous behavior? Is her distancing herself from humanity her attempt at distancing herself further from Eric? After all, his acts of violence were done for the sake of pursuing his own humanity, for the sake of pursuing his beautiful bride. Is this why she doesn't have a name? Does she feel more comfortable with the idea of being a mismanaged collection of somebody else's property rather than her own individual person? Is that why she still loves Victor, despite him clearly taking advantage of her in her infantile state? Does she even acknowledge what happened to her as not right? Or does she view herself in a different light because of what she is? Fuck, I wish there was some sort of question along these lines being brought up during her time on screen, because there's only so much bitch I can take before it gets irksome. There is a fascinating character to be had here if we just focused more on her and not just what she was doing. The show tells me one thing, but then shows me another in her flashback. Why couldn't we have had moments of her unpacking her life and trying to justify her actions to the most human character in the cast, instead of Alexei asking, "Where is the beef?" This was such a necessary joke, by the way. I was for sure laughing the entire time. Francis used to write real characters. We used to explore complex and emotional themes through their dialogue as well as their actions. Their backstories were organically woven into the story rather than just haphazard flashbacks to pad time. And when there were flashbacks, they were quick, sweet, and to the point. They helped exemplify what the story was trying to say rather than being the story itself. While the bride suffers from this issue remarkably less than someone like Nina, it's still an issue for me when the backstory presents so much more character to be unpacked but never is. Either have the flashback and go through the effort of making it meaningful to the present story being told, or just skip it entirely and tell your story more organically through dialogue, like you did in your previous work. Fuck it, like you did with Rick Flag Sr. already in your first episode. Quick, clean character development, as well as establishing a baseline for who he is as a person by connecting his current actions to past events and feelings. It said more about him in less time than most of the flashbacks have managed to do. Often they've just provided information we already knew or failed to elaborate on themes and topics they introduced, such as with G.I.'s trial. But hey, it wasn't all bad. Besides, there was at least one flashback that served to improve the writing of its titular character. He also happens to be my favorite.
Normalize killing people! It's okay!
Eric Frankenstein, the monster who killed the bride's lover and chased her halfway across the globe. The creature who will kill you if he thinks you are mocking him. The man who will murder you in your home because he thinks leaving you alone without anyone to offer you comfort is a fate worse than death. A romantic, a poet, a movie connoisseur. He is a lumbering oaf and easily the most entertaining character in the show. He also happens to be the best written. Eric's primary goal in life, his sole focus, is returning to his bride, so that he may no longer be alone. He yearns for companionship and views the fact that he is alone, while every man has a wife for his bosom and every beast has a mate, to be a cosmic imbalance in due of a remedy. He needs to feel like he is someone, that his desires are just as valid as that of any other creature, and he is moved to tears when he finds the face of his true love. But life isn't so fair. Despite being the agent of her creation, his presence is rejected by the bride time and time again, because he frightens her, because his sole focus on his own happiness left no room for the bride to grow. He thought the mere idea of her learning to speak would get in the way of their love, that words hide truth, and his actions reflect this. He is a very physical person. He shows his affection and his anger in rather simplistic ways, but he is always honest about how he feels. He takes the quickest conceivable routes to solving his problems, because he thinks that murdering his way to what he wants is as effective a strategy as anything need be. He is a very big child, who lacks any form of critical thinking if it doesn't involve violence. And much of the charm of his interactions with Rick Flag in episode 4 and 5 come from Rick needing to explain why that's not always a good idea. But despite the comedy, it does make you think about his nature as well as the similarities he shares with the bride. Although Eric has a much more bubbly personality, while the bride is ever the jaded hollow husk, they both seem to think that solving their problems with violence is the best possible strategy, even if directly advised not to. The difference comes from their reasoning. The bride has taken the stance that human life doesn't matter to her, even though her flashback says otherwise, and as such has no qualms with taking lives if it means getting what she wants. And if we are to take the madam's explanation at face value, which does seem to be what is asked of us, the reason the bride has such a disposition towards violence is because of a lack of respect towards herself and in turn towards everyone else. Apparently she also has a bit of a death wish, though I don't really know how much I actually buy that one. None of her actions in the story seem to highlight an aspect of carelessness or haphazard behavior you would typically expect from someone with a death wish, but I'm not exactly an expert. Eric's position is more so that he thinks his life and the life of his bride are so important that nothing else in his way actually matters. He has what is typically known to be main character syndrome, where he views himself as the central protagonist of his own story, much to the detriment and exclusion of others. Unlike the bride, he is far less likely to follow orders, arguing about every small detail that makes his life even slightly less convenient, and really doesn't take kindly to even perceived slights of his person. It may also be that Eric has a very strong motivator, where the bride just exists in the here and now with no real goals or ambitions, at least until she gets command of the creatures at the end of the season. Eric's pursuit of the bride's beauty is the exact thing that keeps him going. He cannot imagine a world where he is unable to see her magnificence, and is the sole reason he agrees to release Rick, cause if he refused, then he very likely would have been blind, leaving him no reason to keep living. At least that's what he suggests to the gypsy woman who looks after him in his flashback. But thanks to her insight, she is able to convince him that he is still capable of experiencing beauty even without the use of his eyes. It is a scene I enjoy quite a bit because it speaks to who Eric is as a person, and depending on your interpretation of him, can add a fair bit of substance to his rather simplistic portrayal. The way I view it is that Eric is so infatuated with the bride that merely thinking of her brings him peace, and is unfortunately the reason he commits so many atrocities. Another way you could view it would include something more selfish, that he views the bride as an extension of his own humanity, which itself is his true goal. I don't personally like this interpretation because it goes against many of his scenes, which showcase him really caring about the bride and wanting to be a part of her life. However, you could make a case for this based on scenes where he disregards the bride's personal happiness and development because it gets in the way of what he wants. Either way, this piece ends up being the reason he cannot stay, for as much as Bogdana brings him comfort and delight, she is ultimately a distraction to his true purpose. The death of Bogdana is interesting to me because it can very easily be viewed as him just having another one of his tantrums. How dare this woman keep me from my true goal? However, what stands out to me is his dialogue in this scene.
Don't leave. I don't want to be alone.
I would never let you be alone, Bogdana.
Bogdana seems to be an extension of how Eric views himself. A creature without purpose, without companionship, simply meant to live in the here and now. It's something that scares Eric tremendously, and is something he'd not wish on a friend, leaving him very little choice on the matter. Eric's character is just as tragic as any of the other monsters, though unlike the majority of the cast, his backstory adds to his character rather than subtracts from it. There's additional meaning and substance to be taken from his actions and his words, and everything that has happened to him informs his behavior in the modern day. He is simple, but that's not a bad thing when the additional subtext provided provided by these scenes carry a lot of weight. There could be an argument made that more needed to be done with his character, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree. However, what is present is rather substantial, especially in comparison to his peers. Eric is not only a fully developed character, but he's also a good one, which is more than I can ask for from a show this hollow and bland. He's also just really fucking funny.
I'm already coming out here flexing a little bit, letting you know how seriously I'm taking this challenge, so allow me to slip into something a little bit more comfortable.
Speaking of funny, let's talk about the spooky funny skeleton man who melts you to death with a crisp middle finger. Dr. Alexander James Sartoros, also known as Alex, is a former nuclear physicist from Gotham City. He was attempting to treat various forms of cancer with an experimental radiation therapy that would destroy tumors completely without harming the patient. However, in order to get the funding for such a treatment, he would need to seek the aid of notorious crime boss Rupert Thorne. Rupert agreed to fund the experiment as long as Alex gave him the results, which he would then send to Bialian scientists, who were assisting in maintaining an oppressive regime over the country. Alex's wife was against the arrangement due to the risks it put her family under, as well as her own personal history involving a country with a similar regime. Alex promised her that the arrangement was only temporary, with the benefits outweighing the risks. He also agreed to stop providing accurate results from his experiments to relieve her stress. However, Rupert caught wind of this betrayal and decided to punish Alex by framing him for the death of his wife and daughter before forcing him to commit toaster bathtub in a nuclear coffin. Instead of dying, what emerged from the attempted end of his subscription to life was a glowing skeleton capable of eviscerating everything he touched. This creature then made his way to Rupert's home, where he proceeded to end the lives of Rupert and his entire family, including his 2 children. It then proceeded to commit similar acts of violence to every member of Rupert's gang who assisted him in destroying the life of Alexander Sartoros, before taking up the mantle and responsibility of running Rupert's gang. The thing that crawled out of that nuclear coffin was no longer a man, but the highly radiated remains of Dr. Phosphorus, crime boss of Gotham and notorious murderer. What I just described was a villain origin story, not a misunderstood lemming, not an android program with the sole purpose of annihilation, not a misbegotten fish. An actual, down with the sickness asshole who enjoys the carnage he inflicts about as much as he misses his family. Phosphorus is my favorite member of the Commandos because he's just a prick. Since his face is that of a skeleton, it constantly looks like he is smiling, a fact that he uses to bust the balls of anyone he annoys, despite it being a useful mask to hide his probably miserable mug. He is sarcastic, likes to take the piss out of anyone he can, and is very much uninterested in forming any sort of relationship with his fellow Commandos, even offering to kill Weasel if he makes too much noise. In his flashback episode, he is discovered by a small girl who reminds him of his own daughter, eventually leading to him giving her uppies the same way he did his own kid. But during the downtime when he makes her cereal, he lets the audience know that he's not exactly happy she found him, and that he can't risk her letting anyone know he was there. This line of dialogue is then directly followed up by the scene which turns him into a monster. It's not exactly subtle in terms of messaging, but I like the direct implications of his statement here and what it means for him as a character. He is too far gone to simply enjoy a moment of respite with his new friend. If he needs to, he is willing to do what it takes to make sure he gets out of this situation unscathed. I can't imagine any other member of the Commandos being willing to go that far to cover their tracks. I could imagine a version of Weasel doing that if he was still my boy, and there is the possibility of G.I. committing the act if the small girl reminded him of a Nazi. Not exactly hard given his track record. But in terms of logical thinking characters, he is the only one with that capacity for real violence. This is also reflected in the way that he fights. Unlike the Bride or G.I. who will just shoot you the majority of the time, Phosphorus likes getting in close. This is because he seemingly enjoys turning the average individual into fresh puddles of silly putty, and does so in the most extravagant methods possible. There honestly isn't that much in terms of depth to his character, but I find this remarkably refreshing given how every character thus far needed to have some sort of additional layer to their behavior, even if they really didn't need it. It's nice to just have a guy who likes being evil. I get if that's a bit anticlimactic, but there isn't really much to say about him. He's just a glowing skeleton who likes to turn you into blood pudding, and sometimes that's all you need.
In a perfect world, men like me would not exist. But this is not a perfect world.
The story of Creature Commandos is a few things. It's a story of government oversight becoming blind to fear and panic. It's a story about not judging a book by its cover. And it's a story about forming friendships with the most unlikely of people. Throughout this story, we were introduced to a couple of themes I would like to discuss, hopefully at a level most of you would deem acceptable. It's not really my strong suit, and this will probably be the worst part of this video, but I'll give it a try. I've mentioned a few times how the biggest themes on the show were what it means to be a monster, as well as what it means to be human, as we were introduced to a variety of characters that can be placed in either category. But before we delve into those topics, I guess I should start by defining what I mean by human and monster. I'm not exactly a philosopher by any means, so I will just stick to a basic understanding of the terms that are supported by the show. Being human in this case tends to refer to people who are accepted and integrated into society. They can form relationships, have higher levels of intelligence compared to that of animals, as well as a level of reasoning that allows them to communicate and bargain with others. Being a monster would refer to creatures with more base desires. While they may feature high levels of intelligence, they tend to lack the same levels of reasoning and prefer to communicate through violence. They tend not to form relationships with others, preferring to be isolated and are regularly excommunicated from society. This is an explanation that is bound to upset a few of my friends, but that's what I'm sticking to. So with that said, let's try and dig into it. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a monster? In episode 2, Eric states that to be human is to love, and to be loved, to share oneself with that of another, and to be accepted for who they are. It's his primary motivator for wanting a wife. He no longer wishes to feel alone and is in desperate need for love. This could be viewed as his need to form a relationship, though it could also be his more base desires needing to be fulfilled. Eric is isolated from society, but it's not of his choice. After the death of his father, Eric doesn't seem to have much trouble integrating into at least some aspects of society. Though he is no longer ostracized, he doesn't feel a need to form long-lasting relationships with others if it means he cannot be with his bride. This doesn't mean he is incapable, rather it means he has more important shit to do. He is definitely dangerous and prone to incredible violence, but he's also more than capable of listening to reason, of forming alliances to mutual benefit. Eric is also shown multiple times paying for services, rather than demanding things be given to him because he has the power to take it. Let's compare this behavior to his dad. And yes, I get that this is cheating. It's often a popular opinion that Frankenstein was the real monster due to his hubris and abandonment of his personal responsibilities. But, just in case you don't know, I'll go over it. Victor Frankenstein is human, based on his biology, as well as meeting several of the parameters set by that very murky definition. He has a wife, and presumably a family, so he is capable of forming relationships. He is shown reasoning with Eric and has a vast intelligence, allowing him to be a leading scientist in his field. However, the nature of his work demands that he is isolated from society. We are never shown him interacting with anyone other than his creations. He has a wife, but commits acts of adultery despite this, because the bride happens to fulfill his base desire. He never commits acts of violence, but also disregards Eric's desires and personal feelings, choosing to upset him in remarkably interesting fashions. Despite the bride being made with the intention of being Eric's wife, Victor seemingly has no interest in at least introducing the pair, and actively prevents Eric from coming close to her. The bride is understandably scared of Eric, preferring the company of Victor, but Victor also seems to take advantage of this fact. Much like how he's depicted in the book, Victor's ambitions have no real end. The initial act of playing God and taking control over life itself is already viewed as a monstrous act of nature. However, his careless behavior and wanton disregard for the emotional state of his son ultimately led him to his demise. He's Icarus if the son were a pair of luscious thighs. But already we can see that this is a complicated question, and that seems to be intentional. Another example we could look at is Dr. Phosphorus. He very much seems to be an archetypical monster with the way he behaves, but he's not ostracized from society either. The only reason he has the power he does now was because an incredibly monstrous act was done to him and his family, leading to a tremendous retaliation as a result. He didn't magically get to become the kingpin of crime. He inherited all of his wealth and power by taking over Rupert Thorne's operations. The people he paid to be subservient to him showed as much loyalty to him as you would expect for a crime boss. Yet despite being born human, raised human, loved as a human, he is still exempt from the same treatment as humans because of the nature of his body composition. Granted, he is a bit excessive with the way he mutilates people, but there isn't much difference between what he does and what another person can do with a really fast rock. Yet you won't see one of the Craig brothers in this outfit despite them being kinda just awful. Nina is one of the best people on the planet, never having done anything wrong. Ever. And while that's annoying, It does add to the fact that she was never a monster, no matter what the bride said to convince her otherwise. Hell, G.I. was allowed to stand trial because he met the state's current definition of a man. Weasel has a lawyer standing up for him, so it really just depends on what's in everyone's drinking water. I'm running out of waffles to eat, so I'll just cap it off here by saying there is no real answer to this question. Being human or being a monster is down to point of view. People will often ostracize what they do not understand while trying to justify heinous acts done by the most monstrous of people. But even the devil doesn't want to see the world burn. It's not a case of being one or the other. It's a coin toss, and the side you get depends on the things that happen to you and the kind of person that you are. A few of the characters in the show fit both definitions, and again, that's the point. I just wish the point was discussed more clearly.
We're just like Kevin Bacon.
Creature Commandos as a show is ultimately rather disappointing. The patented Francis charm is few and far between, with the majority of the show's content being padded nonsense. While there is enjoyment to be had with a few of the characters, much of what is on display can quite frankly be ignored because it doesn't contribute to the plot, to the characters, or to the themes. I am of course referring to the flashback, but this can also be attributed to some of the piss-poor attempts at humor. In terms of animation, I think the show looks pretty good. It's not exactly stellar, but considering the most popular animated show out at the moment is Invincible, I am glad the show looks as good as it does for as long as it does. It very easily could have been worse. I do think some of the violence overstays its welcome. I'm not trying to be a Scrooge about violence, I'm not against it in my media, but when I see a scene of Phosphorus melting a man's head by stepping on him, to me, the cutaway followed by the gooey noises as he plants his foot firmly into this man's skull is far more effective with portraying how gruesome the act is than actually seeing the result. The mind is capable of conjuring significantly scarier things as a result of limited information than whatever you are going to show me. Sometimes the scariest things are the things we can't see. I'm not asking for the scene of the bride removing the yapping windmill's heart to be removed, I'm just saying certain choices would have worked better for me had they been simplified. In terms of voice acting, I think everyone does a great job. Standouts to me would have to be David Harbour as Eric and Indira Varma as the bride. I found them the easiest to listen to and they delivered the most consistent performances, though I can't think of a single performance I would fault. Music is honestly annoying. Francis has always been a fan of incorporating music into his films, though I appreciate it much more when it was included diegetically in the Guardians of the Galaxy film through Star-Lord's Walkman. They also tended to fit the tone of his films more than they did here. From what I remember, they also weren't that bad in Peacemaker, and I'm not exactly a fan of that show. But yeah, that's just me. I think if the show were maybe given like 3 more episodes to really iron out some of the lesser developed characters while giving Nina something to actually justify her existence, it could have been a better product overall. 7 episodes seem oddly short for your flagship series meant to start up your new universe. I get there's a lot of things that need to be done, but still, rather odd choice. And yeah, I think that's all my thoughts summed up. I haven't done a media review in a while, so I thought I'd give it a go. You may have noticed the style's a bit different as I am trying new things to see what works for me. If you enjoyed watching this, then please do consider subscribing. I know a few people are wanting me to respond to a certain bird brain, and that is in the works. It's just on the back burner because there's a lot of stuff that's coming out that just so happened to catch my attention. And there was stuff on the back burner already that still needs to come out. Point is, plenty of content to come, so stay tuned. I've decided to make this a little bit more of a permanent thing for me, so please make sure it's worth my while. See you all again very soon. Bye bye now.
Approved! Excellent argument. Approved! Approved! What's the worst that could happen? I don't know. What's the worst that could happen? It's now illegal. Approved! What's the worst that could happen? Look at you. You who were once so proud. Go now and never return. Approved!